Hi, we are back, everybody. We will go with our second guest. His name is Edited Skaarup. He's a representative of the Fredericton Regional Museum, and he's also a friend of the late Stanton Friedman. He's now organizing an exposition to Mr. Stanton Friedman, the most popular ufologist of Canada. Mr. Skaarup, you are welcome.
Good afternoon, Jan. Can you hear me well, and can everybody else hear and see me well?
Very well.
This is good. Well, as Jan mentioned, it was quite an honor to be invited to speak to a particular group. I know an awful lot of us have an interest in it. I really enjoyed Chris Stiles' presentation on Shag Harbor. I've been fascinated by that for years. I'm going to tell you a little story about Stanton before I take questions. And basically, to sum it up, something like this. Stanton was a native of Fredericton. He was a noted nuclear physicist and a well-known ufologist. He was a leading author on unidentified flying objects, alien abductions, and the Roswell incident, considered by many to be the definitive UFO event. And by the way, that was one of 7 crashes from the 1947 era on, and it was the 5th one that actually drew all of the attention. Stanton said his belief in extraterrestrials was based on his research into data about UFO events that he found buried in U.S. government documents. And I'll talk more about our discussion on that later. He grew up in Linden, New Jersey. He worked for 14 years as a nuclear physicist with General Electric, Westinghouse, and McDonnell-Douglas. He had dual American and Canadian citizenship. I asked him how he wound up here in Fredericton, and he said he met a lovely lady from the city, married her, Marilyn, came to Fredericton in 1980, and his daughter Melissa Friedman grew up here. She kindly helped to donate many of his artifacts and objects to us and to the museum. Stanton first became interested in UFOs in 1958. He began lecturing on the topic in 1967, but he never actually saw one himself. Stanton carried out detailed research and on-site investigations into the subject of UFOs and alien life forms, physically visiting and meeting at places with on-site investigations, getting into the subject of UFOs and those forms. He was known for being highly intelligent. He had a great sense of humor. He interviewed for numerous documentaries on radio and television and gave presentations on UFOs for hundreds of colleges and professional groups around the world. He was introduced into the UFO Hall of Fame in Roswell, New Mexico, and his work was celebrated by the City of Fredericton when it declared 27 August 2007 Stanton Friedman Day in his honor. I asked him, what else kept you here? He says, listen, there are more nuclear physicists concentrated in the City of Fredericton area than there are anywhere else in North America. I said, what? And he said, yes, think about the Point-LaPro nuclear reactor. Those people who advise and contract on that, they're here. You've got an excellent university, you have an excellent library, you have an extremely intelligent community that's excellent to commune with. This is a great place to live. If I have to get somewhere, there's an airport down the road and I can get other things down there in Bangor. Plus, I like the place, and that was good enough for me. Stanton examined the documentary evidence for the existence of clandestine government group called Majestic 12. This was supposedly formed in 1947 to deal with the remains of the crashed flying saucer near Roswell, New Mexico. The Majestic 12 documents refer to a top secret research operation created by President Truman to coordinate the study of debris and the alien bodies recovered from the crash site. The U.S. government has consistently denied there was ever such an incident or group. Friedman attempted to authenticate these documents. He also refuted arguments by debunkers. You have to remember, Stanton himself, as a nuclear physicist and scientist, began his investigation of all this because he was a debunker. He knew it couldn't be true. Yeah. But when he got into the documents to prove it and found in the National Archives these memorandums and briefings to the president, he realized he had been wrong and there was far more to this to investigate. And he took it on with a vengeance. As I say, a lot of people tried to refute it. He says, I'm a scientist. I go on the evidence. Show me the evidence. I was shown the evidence. I found the evidence. This stuff is real. He investigated the 1961 UFO abduction of Betty and Barney Hill. This included the star map that Betty Hill saw inside the craft and was later recreated. The Hill story emphasized the character of the aliens, including their curiosity, their democratic discussions, and their desire to avoid inflicting pain. And this is where Stanton and I had some rather significant disagreements on what we thought they were and what they were about. My sources put it this way. Essentially, there are three kinds. There are those who are coming to investigate, just to see what we're about, just to learn something about us. There are those who are coming here to help. And there are those who should be spit off the face of the planet because they have no goodwill. That's quite a variety of what's going on. But Stanton went with the crew that Betty described as their desire to avoid inflicting pain. More to follow. When you visit our Fredericton Region Museum, you're going to encounter an exhibit that has been assembled to honor Stanton. Elements of his personal collection of awards, his artifacts, and letters are on display. Artwork and UFO-related illustrations have been assembled and placed inside the imagined interior of a UFO, which you're invited to step into. At the entrance is a diagram of the Betty Hill star map and is presented in the backdrop of a full-scale illustration of a reported type of alien. Plus, we have a couple of larger-than-life mannequins of aliens inside and a lot of things to see and do and to have a look at. Stanton had an excellent sense of humor, but we wish to emphasize our exhibit is to honor him, and we hope you enjoy it when you come. And I'd be happy to take some of your questions. I do have some photographs, but I think it's perhaps a bit awkward on here. And since we've gone on with time, I'll leave well enough for long.
It's okay if you can share the photograph. Please do it, and we will ask you some questions.
We do have quite a few, some illustrations of what they're about. A number of artists have contributed paintings and illustrations, again, artifacts from Stanton, to make the exhibit interesting. A little awkward at the moment because of COVID-19. The museum is technically closed. If we have one or two visitors at a time, we can walk them through, and that way we make sure things are clean and safe. But it'll probably be in the spring before we open the exhibit up to everyone to visit widely. If your group and guests have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer what I can. As I say, I have some rather personal views, and if I can put in a plug for it, a lot of people want to refer to these beings who are coming from elsewhere as aliens. Are they? It's a question that can drag on for a long time, and everybody has a point of view. I reached the point where it was very difficult to determine, are they physical, as in real, you can reach out and touch them, or are they temporal or spiritual? I don't believe in werewolves and vampires. I'm sure very few of you do. But I do believe that there are people with mental illnesses who think that they are, and that's how we end up with people, murderers like Clifford Olson and so on, Paul Bernardo. Those things, people, exist. And my concern was, if they are a threat, what can you and I do to protect ourselves from it? And if they're not a threat, how do we address them or communicate with them so that we don't pose a threat to them? And so in my stories of people that I've interviewed who claim to have had experience of encounters, I refer to them as visitors. And I'm open to questions on the subject.
Good. When you were talking, I showed some image. Was the for the public? It was the Fredericton Regional Museum to show a bit idea. You have a question, Dr. Genta?
Well, did Stanton Friedman be involved in the analysis of the map that Betty Hill drew, and that Marjorie Fish, apparently a mathematician, made a three-dimensional model? And from this model, for the first time, the two stars Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 were identified. Did Stanton Friedman, was he involved in that part of the investigation?
Considerably. He spoke with Marjorie at great length and with Betty's family to get into the detail and the discussion of why they determined that Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 were the most likely stars. He got into a detailed account of it, and in fact, he wound up writing a book on it, fairly recent, just a few years ago, that described the Betty and Barney Hill story, and specifically the map. And one of the reasons that we blew it up to use as a background for the entrance into the Friedman exhibit, because it didn't just show the two stars that they felt that these people were from, it showed other planets that they traded with and other places that they went to, based again on science, which Friedman was absolutely adamant about. You got to have the proof and the science or it isn't worth anything. Marjorie's Fish's approach to creating suspended balls hanging from strings according to what Betty had seen and laying them out and arranging it. That's how, when she chose from a different perspective to illustrate the star map, you have to picture where they're coming from. If they're coming to us, they're going to see us from their point of view, not ours. And it was important to Stanton in particular that he understood how Marjorie approached it so that we could see what she felt the map represented from Earth's point of view. This, of course, is what pointed back to the two specific stars, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. And there are a number of others who are identified. I'm afraid I don't have the names off the top of my head. But Stanton was keenly interested in ensuring that it was accurate and believable and not something that would be easily discredited. That's why he became a major debunker of this stuff. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
A short question to finish. Have you yourself saw a UFO?
No, but why I'm interested. I served as an Army intelligence officer overseas in Bosnia and Afghanistan, and my job was to find a safe road. If it was mined, or if there was going to be an ambush, or there were threats that we weren't aware of, I needed to know before I sent troops up that road, including myself. I tried many different ways, but talking to people. I would go to the Swedes and they would tell me one thing, and I go to the Turks and I go to the Irish and I go to the Italians and the Romanians and so on. And sometimes I got 7 different ways, at least, of knowing if the road was safe and I could let people go out. But I encountered people who, even though I told them this stuff and they said, we're going to use your road or the route that you're going to use, we have to tell our superiors that we're using another route because we told everybody the road's safe, and if we don't drive on that road, they won't believe us. And I said, but if you do that and tell people you used a different route than the one I told you, it will make it unsafe for them. He says, that's what I got to do. And that's how you have to approach these things. People who, even if they do believe you, can't necessarily accept it or tell other people about it. And I think, as Chris said just in the previous one, there are many people who are either afraid or they're apathetic or they don't care or they fear something connected with having said, I saw a UFO. Pilots don't want to say anything about it because they're afraid of losing their license. So fear is the enemy here. I don't know what we have to fear for them or not. I do know, having spoken to people, that some rather unpleasant things have happened to them. And I would like us to be protected from it and know what to do if we do engage them. So no, I haven't had the experience, but I sure want to know.
Good. We have a question from the public now.
So coming from the live chat, I have a question from Mother Scorpion. Question: do people with strong ESP have more sighting than others that have not tapped in their inner powers?
I would have to explain what a channeler is. Okay. These are people who, because of, well, again, I have a very strong opinion about some of them are full of nonsense and some of them have a genuine connection to the spiritual world. And that gets into, is this stuff in your head temporal, as in there's a universal spirituality where people can communicate. There are people who claim to communicate with the dead. There are people who claim to communicate with these people. I met 5 who are credible, very credible, but it comes through mentally, temporally. It doesn't come through physically. And if you have this ESP connection or ability, yes, they connect with it more easily than you and I do. They say we all can, but I've not had that experience. But as I say, what my concern is, I don't want to be around somebody who can turn into Paul Bernardo or Clifford Olson. You have to be careful what you allow to come into you.
Okay, it's very clear. It was a very good presentation, Mr. Skaarup. You are very in your subject, I find, and I didn't know that you were an ex-military intelligence officer. It's very impressive. Just repeat the address of the museum and When is the exposition about Stanton Friedman?
Fredericton Region Museum, we are still actively working on the exhibit. When Stanton died, he left 100 boxes that took 5 trucks of his documents to bring to the archives. There'll be 10 years going through all of it. His daughter gave us all of his awards, trophies, presentations, memorabilia, tons of photographs. We're still processing that, but we have enough of the exhibit ready now that when we can bring in 2 or 3 visitors, if you're happy visiting the Fredericton area and you want to make a personal visit, you give us a call, Fredericton Region Museum, and we'll take you on a personal tour of the place.
Good.
We expect once COVID settles down, the spring of 2021 will be open to the public.
I hope so.
Thank you for hosting me or having me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Skaarup.